Well, hello again, I'm Maurice and I've got another 10-minute blog for you, so let me start the clock. Okay, we're going. This is study number 6 on the gifts of the Spirit. I've been requested to do this series and I didn't think it takes so many studies, but this is number 6 and I'm looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So although 1 Corinthians 13 is considered the chapter on love, it's actually part of Paul's explanation of the gifts of the Spirit. 1 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about the manifestations of the 9 gifts of the Holy Ghost, and we've looked at those. And then we've got chapter 13. Chapter 14, it tells us how to exercise the gifts of the Spirit practically in the church, and that will be the next blog. But chapter 13 starts with the gifts of the Spirit, so it is actually in context of the gifts of the Spirit. And Corinthians 13 shows us that without the fruit of the Spirit, love is one word that covers the whole of the 9 attributes of the fruit of the Spirit. Corinthians 13 shows us that without the fruit governing the gifts, it's very dangerous. The first 3 verses are revealing. Verse 1 says that if we use the gifts without compassion, then we're like a clanging gong or a tinkling cymbal. In other words, an irritation to God. Verse 2 tells us we are nothing to God, He can't even recognise us. I never knew you. And verse 3 tells us that we're unprofitable. It doesn't profit me if I use the gifts without the fruit. Well, the modern versions use the word love in Corinthians 13, but I can't use that word because it's lost its meaning in modern society. Love and sex are synonymous now with young people. And I can't use the word charity that the authorised version uses because charity has also lost its biblical meaning in our modern society. Charity is a business now that does good with its money, or it's giving our old clothes away to a charity shop. And we've lost the real meaning. So I'm going to use the word compassion, because I believe compassion is love in action. And compassion is the best word I know to convey what Paul wanted to say. It's interesting that in the rest of Corinthians, the translators have used the word love. But from the same root in chapter 13, they've used the word charity. So they obviously realised that they needed to use a different word. And I think compassion really is very fitting in today's language. So let me read the first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, so there's the gifts of the Spirit, and have not compassion, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, understand all mysteries and all knowledge, so these are the gifts of the Spirit, word of knowledge. And though I have all faith, not some faith, not a grain of mustard seed, but all faith, so that I could remove mountains, plural, and have not compassion, I am nothing. God can't recognise me. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, that's to become a martyr, and have not compassion, it profits me nothing. So the gifts of the Spirit are only of use to God when they're governed by compassion. Power without control or maturity is dangerous. For example, if I give a young boy some explosives are neutral, can be used for good or bad. But if I give a little child explosive, he'll blow himself up and kill a lot of people as well. So you need maturity to exercise power. The false prophets use the gifts of the Spirit, or should I say they abuse them, but their motive isn't love. That's the problem. Unless the motive is love, then it's abusing the gifts. Their motive is the love of money, or the love of the praise of men and of status, and it doesn't count for God. They're false prophets in Jesus' estimation in the Sermon on the Mount. Well, verse 4 to 8 of 1 Corinthians 13, it's known as the description of love. But I would argue against that because I don't believe love can be described, no more than hate can, or envy, or jealousy, or even God. You can't describe God because spiritual things are spiritually discerned, and therefore you cannot quantify them in material attributes. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says this, the natural man received not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them because they're spiritually discerned. So the only way you understand anger is because you've felt the same emotions as I have, but you cannot describe anger. You can only describe how you feel when you have it. I wanted to tear my hair out, I wanted to stamp my feet, I wanted to smash him in the face, whatever you say, but that's not describing anger. You're describing the reactions or the manifestations of anger in your heart. And it's the same with envy and love. So this is not a description of love. Verse 4 to 8 tells us of physical manifestations when I do love. So when I love, it says compassion, love suffereth long and is kind. When I have compassion, I don't envy. When I have compassion, I don't get proud, I'm not puffed up. When I have compassion, I'm not easily provoked. I think no evil, I rejoice not in iniquity. I rejoice in the truth. Compassion, if I have compassion, I bear all things, I believe all things, I hope all things. So it's talking about the manifestations of love. It's not describing it, because you can't describe physical things. You cannot prove God. If you've never experienced God and you don't know him, it's silly trying to explain God as much as it is to describe hate or love. Jesus' motive was always compassion. When he used the power of God, his motive was always compassion. Let me give you some scriptures. Matthew 9 verse 36. But when Jesus saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Matthew 14 verse 14. And Jesus went forth and saw great multitudes, and was moved with compassion towards them, and he healed their sick. Mark 1 verse 41. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and said unto him, I'll heal you, be thou clean. So can you see that Jesus' motive was always compassion? So the gifts of the Spirit must be preceded by compassion in our heart. It's very important that when we exercise the gifts, whether I speak in tongues in church, whether I pray for the sick, whatever I do, the fruit of the Spirit must govern the gifts of the Spirit. Another point I want to make is that the gifts are temporary. It tells us in Corinthians 13, they're tools to use till Jesus comes. But when Jesus comes, they won't be necessary. Let's read verse 9 and 10. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. We won't need them when Jesus comes. In eternity, what will I need the gift of tongues for? What will I need the word of knowledge, the word of prophecy? What will I need faith for? I won't. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, that when Jesus comes again, then that which is in part shall be done away with. So it's interesting. They're tools to do the job, the gifts of the Spirit. They're very important and we need them. But unless we have the fruit of the Spirit, the character of Christ, then they're very dangerous. It's interesting, but Corinthians 13, it's an interesting number that. I know that people equate number 13 with superstition, with the occult, and so it is, but that's the counterfeit. But it's a very biblical number. Jesus had 12 disciples, so the 12 disciples plus Jesus made 13, the whole. And the chapter on describing love, in between the gifts of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit that governs love, it's Corinthians 13, and there are 13 verses in it. So let me finish by reading verse 13. It says, now abides faith, hope, compassion. These three. But the greatest of these is compassion. So obviously they're in reverse order. So the greatest is compassion, and then hope, and the last is faith. We measure on faith. But actually, compassion is greater than faith, and compassion is greater than hope. The last one is faith. So the conclusion. So we need the gifts of the Spirit, the tools to do the job, and I'm 100% for all the 9 gifts in this modern age. and they're to prepare the bride for when Jesus comes. But when we see him, we'll be like him and we'll have no need of the gifts of the Spirit in eternity. Love and compassion, joy, gentleness, peace, long-suffering, the fruit of the Spirit will last forever. Why? Because it's the character of God. We won't need the power of God in the new heaven and the new earth. So let me encourage you, seek his character, seek the fruit of the Spirit, seek the giver of the gifts rather than the gifts, and allow God to give you the gifts severally as he wills. I believe this is only a safe way for a disciple of Christ. The time's gone. Have a wonderful week. See you next blog. God bless you.